by some outside governments and organizations to relieve some of the sanctions and to free up money or funding in the coming months. What will be our position?
While we're engaging with the new government with an open mind, it's not enough to say it's a new government, so therefore none of the sanctions or restrictions that were previously in place should apply. We will continue to look for signs of actual implementation. For example, the election that is coming up, there are months and months of preparation that need to lead up to that, and we would be interested to see an openness or an invitation to send outside observers, potentially as part of a group that might be led by an eminent African. And these are things that would need to happen fairly soon and could give some indication of the intentions beyond the nice speeches.
Do we have, do we have any documents yet or timelines that we've put forward, or perhaps that we could look at, that the opposition leaders or others have stated that need to happen in terms of by this date voter rolls need to be completed, by this date such and such has to come down? Is there anything that that has been put together in that regard yet?
We've not seen an actual timeline for leading up to the elections. There was encouraging news that the period for voter registration has been extended into February. We are looking at what a lot of members of civil society have put forth as requests or demands for the new government vis-a-vis actual democratic steps. And we are working very closely with our like-minded partners and trying to remain in sync with them, both in Washington and Harare and in other capitals.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
I'm going to allow Senator Coons to go first.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Thank you, Chairman Flake. And thank you, Ambassador Sullivan. It is great to have an opportunity to talk with you and to the next panel about the transition underway in Zimbabwe and what the future might hold. As Senator Flake referenced, we met with former President Mugabe in February 2016, and like many, I was very pleased to see him go after 37 brutal years. But I think it's critical that the people of Zimbabwe not see one dictator replaced by another. And so I, for one, am reluctant to see us take any steps to lighten or relieve sanctions or other international restrictions on loans or partnership until we see, as you suggested in your testimony, concrete steps by the administration of Emerson and Mnangagwa and any successors. So walk me through three things, if you would. What are the key milestones for us to watch for to get a sense of Emerson Mnangagwa's capacity and willingness to enter significant reforms?
Thank you, Senator. As far as governance goes and respect for human rights, we would like to see immediate implementation of freedom of expression that has been lacking for decades in Zimbabwe, freedom of assembly. We are looking also for a free and responsible media, including social media, the preparations for the elections, as I mentioned, anti-corruption. I believe they've given a 90-day window for people to return ill-gotten gains as an amnesty. Will that happen? Will corruption be pursued in an impartial way, in an apolitical way? How will things progress in terms of rule of law and due process? Those are on the governance side. On the economic side, the country is crumbling under crushing debt. We also have a very low doing business environment there that is a deterrent. So we'd like to see an improved investment climate. Since investors vote with their feet, they are watching very closely because there are potential opportunities there. But investors want to be able to repatriate their earnings. Right. And again, the rule of law and a level playing field will be very important in the economic sphere as well. In addition, in the security sector, we would like to see the security sector earn the trust of the citizens, and that would include police reforms.
I was struck that the budget request for this year for Zimbabwe, if I understood correctly, dropped almost $60 million from the previous year and included no request for democracy and governance programs. It's my expectation that there might be some reprogramming request or some increased willingness to partner with the robust civil society and free press that you referenced. What sort of role do you imagine that USAID and the State Department should play in the run-up to free and fair elections if we are genuinely making progress?
All of our influence is not necessarily tied up with the dollar figure, but to address that point, we do have some flexibility with some regional funds that we could target if we saw an opportunity that looked viable there. I think that our diplomats have a wonderful opportunity to use the bully pulpit to coordinate with like-minded international partners, and also to continue engaging with civil society organizations with whom we may not be currently giving assistance, but with whom we've cultivated relationships over the years. Because fundamentally, this will be about the people of Zimbabwe, and we want to support their aspirations for a country that can reach its full potential.
Last question. So China has long had an active role in Zimbabwe during the liberation struggle and to now. What do you see as their influence in Zimbabwe compared to the United States? What do you see as their trajectory in Zimbabwe? And what do you think are their interests or their priorities compared to ours? I agree with you that this is essentially up to the people of Zimbabwe, and the actions that will determine their future will be taken by Zimbabweans. But it seems to me that this is a moment for the United States to show a principled leadership, active engagement and interest. But I'm wondering what another major influencer in this country has in mind for their short-term agenda as well.
Well, as throughout the continent, China is very interested in resource acquisition, and in their interactions with the various host governments have taken a very hands-off approach in terms of what they might consider undue influence or foreign interference. So we don't expect there will be any change in terms of China's approach, but I think we have a window for the U.S. to engage in a way we haven't been able to engage that will involve U.S. businesses, which of course are private, and we can't compel them to engage the way others perhaps have an opportunity with the state-owned enterprises to engage.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Sullivan. Thank you, Chairman Flake. I think you'll see significant and sustained interest from members of this subcommittee and other committees of the Congress as we try and encourage and support a movement towards a genuinely open and democratic society in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Chairman Flake, and thank you for holding this important hearing. We really appreciate you being here. On November 17, 2017, the Department of Interior published its determination that Zimbabwe was sufficiently stable to allow for the legal importation of elephant trophies into the United States. This announcement was based on ratification of a new conservation plan in Zimbabwe in 2016 in the opinion that trophy hunting adds to the overall conservation of the species. The announcement, however, coincided with the coup of former President Robert Mugabe and a transfer of power to his vice president, underscoring the great instability in the region. Because of these events, the president tweeted that he would put the policy on hold, which I appreciate very much. Wildlife trafficking decimates iconic species while funding global terror organizations. The chairman of this committee and I've worked hard to stem the tide of poaching and illegal wildlife trafficking across the globe, and I'm proud of our bipartisan work in the last Congress to provide agencies and international institutions the funding and tools necessary to stymie and interdict wildlife trafficking. But I worry that the current administration's findings for the elephant and the lion will undermine that progress. Do you believe that Zimbabwe has adequate institutional controls to properly manage wildlife?
That decision is currently being reviewed at the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Department of Interior. As far as the stability or not at the moment, we are taking very much a wait-and-see approach, but we're not sitting on our hands, staying home. We're engaging actively with members of the new government, with civil society, with other influential actors on the ground. So I think the answer to that would be it's too early to say what the level of stability is.
And do you believe that in this period of upheaval, the government can regulate hunting of iconic species, including lions and elephants, in a manner that will prevent illegal wildlife trafficking?
While there has been upheaval, there also seems to be a great deal of continuity if you look at the cabinet that is currently in place. So at this point, again, I would say that we're going in with our eyes wide open, and this remains an area that we look at in terms of U.S. policy and also what it might mean to the Zimbabwean ecotourism industry, and they're looking for diversification of the economy. They have an opportunity to increase the 50,000 or so American tourists who go there. And so we're just going to have to wait and see regarding their ability to manage. And this might be part of security sector reforms that we could potentially look at.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Media reports indicate that Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission chairperson, Justice Rita Makaro, resigned abruptly on Friday without any rationale. The press is speculating that she was pressured to resign, and opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai said that Makaro's resignation had opened a can of worms. What do you know about her successor and whether the change in leadership of the commission will make credible elections next year more or less likely?
Senator, I'd like to take that question back and respond for the record.
That would be good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Thank you so much. So I'm just trying to understand the administration's position given things that are going on right now. You've talked about a lot of reforms that we're looking and waiting for, reforms on this coming election and how important that is, a desire potentially to send election observers. You talked about reforms in government, talked about reforms in the mining industry. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how you think we have, what leverage you think we have to ensure that we can see, let's start with free and fair elections, to see that those elections happen? Is there any ways that you think we have to further leverage that, or something that Congress could be doing?
I'll take the latter part of that question first, if I may. We certainly welcome engagement of Congress and travel to the region, letters, engagement, and we will continue to work with you on the way forward. As far as the leverage, I think we see in place a new government that is eager to have a sense of legitimacy that the predecessor government lacked, despite the fact that it's a lot of the same people. Again, it offers an opportunity that we would like to try to work with and induce in a positive direction. The country is having a severe economic crisis, and that is another point of leverage, that without the reforms, there will not be good things happening on the economic front. And then finally, we are very tightly lashed up with our like-minded counterparts in country and having ongoing discussions with them about the preparations for the election.
So can I interrupt you there?
Sure.
There have been reports that the British government may consider extending a bridge loan to Zimbabwe in order to clear unpaid arrears and open up funding from the IMF and World Bank. Has the British government given you an indication that they plan to do this?
We don't have any direct knowledge of that. We've seen some similar reporting. Acting Assistant Secretary Don Yamamoto was just in London this week. I'm positive that Zimbabwe came up in the conversations. As far as I know, that specific angle did not come up, and we remain in a very united approach to this.
Okay, great. The accountability for atrocities, which is, I think, something that is, as I'm sure you agree, is of profound importance. Tens of thousands have been killed in numerous, unfortunately, raids and operations and massacres. church groups have documented an alarming record of government-sponsored atrocities before the 2008 elections. We see the State Department said in 2000 that Mnangagwa was widely feared and despised throughout the country. That's the State Department's words, and could be an even more repressive leader than Mugabe. And so I understand that you're sort of having a wait and see if we can have inducements. But clearly, when it comes to accountability for atrocities, if there seems to be so much compelling evidence that this is someone that participated in this, how do you level that with our policies towards this new administration?
Well, one of the things we'll be looking for is for the people and government of Zimbabwe to organize some sort of a truth and reconciliation process so that they can work through these traumas of the past. As far as President Mnangagwa, he remains under U.S. sanctions. And again, this is the government that is in front of us right now, and we're going to try to work to engage positively. He, in his inauguration speech, really wanted people to look forward and forget about the past. We're not going to forget about the past. We're going to keep that in mind as we deal with him and other members of the government. But again, not just appeal to their better natures, but try to help the government and the people of Zimbabwe move forward beyond this very, very dismal past track record of human rights.
And just, be candid with me if you can, to expect a government led by someone who participated and was responsible for horrific violations, horrific human rights atrocities, to expect there to be a real truth and reconciliation coming from a government led by someone who is a record that from our own State Department seems to be so horrific. Should we really be expecting there to be a real truth and reconciliation process?
Well, we certainly don't believe this will be a spontaneous course of action without a great deal of pressure and discussion. And it's not just the United States. It's also, as I mentioned earlier, the like-minded partners and a very active civil society. There were so many people out in the streets celebrating the prospect of a new Zimbabwe. They have high expectations, and we think in some ways, maybe not dramatically yet, but the lines have moved, and the kinds of oppression that people felt obliged to withstand in the predecessor regime, I think that it's been a bit of a game changer, despite the fact that it's a lot of the same people who are running the show at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador Sullivan, for your testimony. We'll now turn to our other panel and give them a few minutes. So I'll recess for just 2 minutes while the new panel comes. Appreciate the answers you've given today.
Thank you.